If you've been wanting to make a jelly roll rug, but have been feeling overwhelmed by all the steps, all the options, all the supplies, this video is for you. I'm going to show you a simple, beginner-friendly way to make your first jelly roll rug. There's no fancy equipment and no overthinking. I'll walk you through the supplies I use, how to sew the tube, and how to put the tube together to sew the actual rug, all without pulling your hair out in frustration and without the dreaded ripple in the rug. This tutorial is for the no frills beginner who just wants to get the rug done with a minimum amount of fuss and extra supplies needed, but still end up with a beautiful rug that you're really proud of. If you want a deeper dive into some of the other options, such as Amazon jelly roll fabric or designer jelly roll fabric, or comparing the two different ways to start a jelly roll rug, I'll link those down below. But if you're a nervous beginner and you're ready to get started, let's dive in. Let's start with the supplies. This is just what I'm using. You don't need the most expensive version of anything. I'm using this jelly roll fabric from Amazon because it's affordable, it's easy to get, and it's really pretty. It's the Mermaid from Tinyspool. I'll put the link down below. But you can use any jelly rug roll fabric, or you can even cut your own fabric. Just cut your strips 2.5 inches wide. Then you'll need some batting. I recommend the pre-cut batting, the 2.25 inch wide batting that I used for my first jelly roll rugs. I'll put the link down below, and it worked fantastic. For this rug, I had used some leftover batting that I had used for a different project. So I just folded up the batting and cut it to 2.25 inch strips. Do whatever is the easiest for you. For my first jelly roll rugs, I am really glad that I bought the batting because it's all pre-measured and already done for you, and it saves you that extra step. The only extra tool that I highly recommend that you get is called the Clover tool, and it helps to fold the fabric into the tubes. Now, you could just fold it and iron it yourself, but doing it by hand will add on a lot of extra time, so I do highly recommend the Clover tool. And once again, I'll pop that link down below. And obviously, you'll need a sewing machine. I'm just using my old Kenmore that has very basic stitches. All you need is a machine that can straight stitch and zigzag stitch. And you will appreciate a new needle. Some people recommend a denim needle. I didn't have one of those, so I just popped in a brand new universal needle because there is a lot of sewing for this project and you will be sewing through a lot of layers. So you really do want a nice sharp brand new needle in your machine. It will take away a lot of frustration. For a presser foot, some people like to use a walking foot. I don't actually own a walking foot. My machine never came with it, or maybe I lost it somewhere along the way. So I'm just using the normal foot that came with the machine. I have heard that some people say a walking foot can make a difference for them. So if you do have a walking foot, you might want to try it and experiment with it. That's actually a video that I've been interested in doing to see if there's a difference between a walking foot and a regular foot. But all the jelly roll rugs that I've sewn so far, I've just used a regular foot and they've all turned out fine. Again, use what you have and what you're comfortable with. For thread, you'll want some sort of a neutral color that blends in with whatever jelly roll fabric that you decide on. I've done some research on this, and the general consensus is to go with a gray thread. It seems to match and blend in with the most variety of fabrics. I'll link below to the one that I used, but again, depending on the fabric that you've chosen, a white or an off-white thread that you already have in your stash will probably work out just fine as well. And then of course, have your regular sewing supplies like clips or pins and scissors, etc. The first step is to make the tube, and to do that, we have to sew the strips end to end. If you're using a pre-cut jelly roll and want to keep things simple, just sew the strips together as they come out of the roll. If you have a great eye for color and design, you might want to change up the order of the strips. I do not have a great eye for color and design, so I just go in the already predetermined order that the roll comes in. I do like the look of the rugs best when the darker color is on the outside edge of the rug. So depending on how your jelly roll is, you might want to flip the order of the color strips. But with the pre-cut jelly rolls, you really can't go wrong. They've already color matched it all for you lovely. It's going to end up beautiful no matter what.
Now you want to sew the strips together on a diagonal. This reduces the bulk and it actually looks cooler than if you just sew the strips straight across. So you place the first strip down and then lay the next strip right sides together, with the second strip being perpendicular to your bottom strip. And then you sew diagonally across. Now, I always double check this angle because I've messed this up so many times. So just quickly check that you're sewing down the right diagonal and that your strips are facing the right way. And then you can just keep going. So you just chain sew end to end. There's no need to backstitch because everything will be folded over and sewn over. And then once they're all chain sewed, you'll end up with a big pile of them all connected. So you need to cut between them and then trim off the little excess triangle piece. But save those little triangle pieces if you want, because I have another really cool project planned for them. Now you'll end up with a big pile of all your strips sewn together end to end. I just leave it in the pile on my counter. It naturally works for the next step, but some people like to wind it up into something tidy. But again, I like to just keep things simple. And now we're ready for step 2, sewing the actual tube. This part looks intimidating, but once you get started and have this little gizmo, it's actually really easy. You don't have to have the Clover tool. You could do it all by hand by folding the strips in half and pressing them, but doing it by hand would take forever, and the Clover tool just makes it so easy. And if you're committed to making one jelly roll rug, the Clover tool really is the one extra expense I do recommend. So to start your tube, you lay your fabric strip right side down and place the batting on top. The fabric strip is 2.5 inches wide, and the batting I'm using is 2.25 inches. Some people like their batting to be the full 2.5 inches wide, but I find the 2.25 inch wide batting makes it easier to fold and reduces the bulk in the sewing. Again, you do whatever is easiest for you. And then you're ready to use the Clover tool. The Clover tool has 2 parts to it. The larger part goes on first to make the initial fold, and the pieces just pop together super easy. And then the second part of the Clover tool folds everything in half again to create the tube. Now at the very start of the tube, you'll want to fold in the raw edges over on itself so it's tucked right in there, so there's no frayed edges to begin with, and then you're ready to sew it. I'm using a straight stitch to sew the tube because that's what I have. Some people have that really nice serpentine stitch that creates the wave down the middle of the tube. My machine doesn't have that fancy stitch, so I'm keeping it basic and just using the straight stitch. I also like to stitch close to the open edge. I think it makes the rug a little bit puffier, which I prefer. Some people prefer to stitch right down the center of the tube, but again, it's just personal preference. And then this is the part where you sew and sew and sew. This step feels like it takes the longest to me, but I also find it the most meditative. So I put on my headphones, I start an audiobook, and just get into the groove until you run out of bobbin thread. At this point, I also take a moment to clean out the bobbin area because it is a really fluffy project and you'll find a lot of lint gets collected in there. So if I'm opening up the bobbin casing, I'll just clean it out really quick. I use a laundry basket at the end of my table to catch the tube. Some people will wind it up at the end of it. I just let it fall into the basket loose, and it always seems to work out just fine in the order that it falls into the basket. All right, we're almost there. Now that your tube is finished, it's time to start sewing it into an actual rug. And this is where I was really intimidated my first few rugs. I was nervous about all the scrunching and getting that dreaded wave and ripples, and I wasn't sure quite how to start. Now with my first 2 rugs, I used the scrunch method. I folded it only once and then scrunched it around the corners. In my last video, I did a comparison video between the scrunch method and the folding method, and it actually converted me to recommending the folded method for beginners. With the folding method, I found that the rug laid flatter in the beginning and had less bulk in the corners. Now you can just sort of make up how to fold the fabric in a way that keeps the fabric lying flat. But there is a really amazing folding method that's copyrighted by a small business called JR Designs. So if you want to just copy how she's done it, I'll put the link to her pattern below. But if you don't want to buy anything else, the scrunch method works just fine. After the first 2 rows, I found out that both methods sew exactly the same. Now first, I'm measuring the length of my center strip. And I'll link to a chart below that shows how the length of the first strip affects the final rug size. But basically, the shorter the strip, the rounder the rug, and the longer the strip in the middle that you start with, the more oval the rug will be. Don't overthink this. I didn't measure anything on my first rugs, and they turned out just fine. Now for this tutorial, I'm going to show the folding method because I found it did lay flatter than the simple scrunch method, but I can't actually show the beginning folds because it is copyrighted. But my tips are keep everything as flat as you possibly can. Use pins or clips if you need to. Go slow and pivot at the corners as needed. Once you have your beginning strip folded over, you can start to sew, and I'm using a wide zigzag stitch here to catch both edges. I'm also making sure that my outside edge is the folded edge of the tube. That's what works best for me. Some people actually like it switched over. With my very first rug, I got really confused with the folding method, so that's why I just used the simple scrunch method just to get it done. As you're folding the tube, you want to make sure that the folded outside edge of the tube is on the outside, which I kept getting mixed up in the beginning. But no matter which method you use, after the first 2 rows, it sews all the same. Now, to keep things flat in the beginning, I don't iron anymore. I did with my first rug, and I found that it actually squished the batting down permanently, but also the ironing took too long as well, and I don't have the patience for it. Now I just use my fingers to squish that inside tube edge flat as I sew. These first few corners can kind of make or break you, so remember to go slow. I often backstitch if I need to. I'll often stop and drop the needle and lift up my presser foot to make those sharp corners if I need to as well. Don't be in a rush, take your time. So you can see that inner tube on the outside edge of the inner tube can start to curl upwards. This is where if you want to iron, you can totally iron that edge down flat. You want it to be flat to your sewing surface, or you're going to end up with a bowl instead of a rug. Now, I don't iron anymore. I just use my fingertips to squish down that outer edge of the inner tube down flat as I can as I sew. So really take your time around those corners, and what you want is to connect the 2 tubes together as flat as possible in a parallel dimension to each other. You do have to scrunch the outer tube a little bit to make sure that it's connected flat. But again, just take your time and go really slow and pivot your needle as needed. As you get into the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th rows, those corners start to become easier and easier, and it starts to lay flatter just on its own. But this is where the waves can start to happen. And the 2 tips that I have to prevent those waves is to, number 1, keep your work surface as flat as possible. My sewing machine doesn't have a large work surface on it, so I have to build up the table, and I just use game boxes and photo albums to support the rug to keep it flat. And the second way to prevent waves is to let the machine do the work. So if you're feeding the outer tube faster or slower than the inner circle, you'll get waves. So I'm not pushing or pulling on the fabric right here. I'm just guiding it so it goes in straight. You want to feed the outer tube in at the same speed as the inner tube. No pushing or pulling, and let the machine do the work. And this is where a walking foot probably could help. Again, I don't have one, so I've never used one, but some people really swear by it, so it's something to keep in mind if you're struggling with this part here. Again, I'm just using my fingers to stabilize the rug and guide the outer tube in straight so it matches up into the inner tube. I'm not pulling or pushing on the fabric at all. As the rug gets bigger and bigger, to prevent the rug from dragging on my unflat surface, I'll fold the rug in half, and that helps prevent the friction and drag of the rug from feeding into the machine all crooked. And I find this part of the rug the most satisfying because you can watch it grow and grow, and it actually gets easier the bigger the rug gets. I find if I can get through that first 3 or 4 rows of scrunching it around those tight corners, things run pretty smoothly after that.
And if you've made it this far, that's it, you did it. You've sewed your first jelly roll rug. It's become one of my favorite sewing projects, and the only problem is it's addictive, and now I have to figure out where to put them all. If you want to do a bit of a deeper dive on some of the different options, like the square rug or the designer fabric versus the Amazon fabric. I'll link everything down below. And if you're in the middle of making your very first jelly roll rug, let us know down below so we can cheer you on.